So, for the first question, I'd like to go on to Winnie, and this question is on housing.
Hi. So there's a lot of homelessness in Greater Manchester, and this is clearly an important issue. So what's your short-term and long-term strategy to prevent and tackle homelessness?
Thank you, Winnie. I think one of the really key things is to understand that homelessness isn't always a problem of people not having homes. There are a lot of wider societal issues and wider personal issues that people have that lead to them finding themselves in a position where they are either homeless or where quite often they choose to voluntarily make themselves homeless to escape issues of violence at home or other problems that are ongoing. So I think we need to look at in a more holistic way than we perhaps are, that sometimes just saying to someone, you haven't got a house, let's put you into this accommodation, actually isn't the answer. It's looking at what support services there are in place and what we are doing as a society to actually support people to be able to make those choices. And that includes looking at issues that would force people to leave home and to actually make themselves voluntarily homeless to escape those situations. So I think it's not just an immediate, I can say we will put in extra shelters or we'll do this or we'll do that. It would be more about looking at what support services we got in Greater Manchester and how are people able to access those, and where is the support network for people that are struggling. So that could be issues around sexuality and gender identity, where children and young people feel that they actually don't want to be at home or they're suffering from a intolerant family situation and need to escape. What can be done about that? Now, those are quite big questions, and there isn't an immediate thing that I can say, this is what I would definitely do. But I think half the problem sometimes in solving a problem is to actually truly understand it. And I think that's where we sometimes fail with issues of homelessness, because we think that there is a simple solution. And I think that problem may potentially get worse, because when we saw when COVID first started, there was an immediate solution. We did take everyone who was homeless off the streets and put them into accommodation. And I think that may be part of a narrative that we need to address going forward, to say that was a very short-term, extreme reaction to a global pandemic that we took as a nation. What can we learn from that? We can learn that people can be housed, but actually that isn't solving the wider issues.
Thank you.
Answered your question?
Well, so I can hear that you think that there is no immediate solution for this problem, and I agree with that. However, do you have a specific strategy that you would implement if you were mayor? Specific things that you would do if you were elected?
Yeah, I think the first thing is really to acknowledge that I'm not the expert in this, and to start meeting with those people who are. So those organisations and groups who do amazing work across our city region, to actually work with people who find themselves homeless and to actually see what they are hearing and what they are advocating for, and to actually use the experts. And again, that's something I think that it's very easy for politicians to go, this is my grand plan. And then there's someone sat who's spent hours and hours and days and weeks and months actually genuinely dealing with the problem on the street, to go, what is she on about? What's that all about? So I think that would be, sort of week one, I would be inviting all of those charity leaders, all of those workers, all of those people who are actually spending the time and really genuinely have the knowledge, to come in and to have a sort of sit down and a conference with me, to sort of say, where do we need the extra support, and where can I actually add value to this? Where is what do you need? What's really working well? And one of the things I've heard from some of the homeless charities is there has been a move to do more work, joined up working together across issues and regions. Actually, that is what we need, but also looking to say, where is it an appropriate place for charities and voluntary organisations to have a role, but also where can we then use money from Greater Manchester to actually replace some of those. And that isn't to do a disservice to those organisations, but to say, this is a problem that affects all of us as a society, should we really be reliant on charities and volunteers to fix it, or should it be what's working well, what's appropriate to stay there, and what then comes much more directly under the mayoral control?
Is it all right if I ask another question?
I'm really sorry, but we're gonna have to move on to our next question.
That's all right.
Is that okay with you, Winnie?
Yeah, that's fine. So I'll pass it on to Georgia now.
Apologies, Winnie.
It's all right.
Hi. If you were elected, can you commit to using the empty homes in Greater Manchester to house the homeless? And how will you implement support services to complement this?
Hi, Georgia. Do you know, one of the big issues that I've talked about quite a lot on a number of different issues is the empty housing across Greater Manchester. It's something that I'm aware that we have, and it's something that when we're talking about other issues other than just homelessness and around building on greenbelt land and developing new properties, these are all really key things that we need to keep coming back to, the empty properties. And I think there is a lot more we could be doing with those. And absolutely, looking at housing people in them that require housing is a really key issue. And I think what we need to recognise, or I need to recognise in saying that, is the fact that there are people who are homeless, and will count on those figures, who actually don't have any wider issues. They just have had some problem that has got them into a position where they're homeless. That could be debt, it could be loss of jobs, it could be illness, and actually just housing them will solve those problems. And they are the people that we should absolutely be looking to put into empty houses and to make those usable and habitable, and not just so that those individuals are housed. But I don't like the idea of empty housing streets where we then are looking at antisocial behaviour, maybe crime, maybe areas of where, no-go areas that people then become afraid to go into. I don't think that's good for society and for our city and for our city region. I think we need to have those areas vibrant and filled with communities, and I think that's something we can do. I know from a friend of mine who is homeless and has been street homeless for a very large number of years, who's got various problems with addiction and what have you. He has been housed previously and hasn't been able to retain and stay in that property because he hasn't had the support that's needed. So I don't think it's something we can solve just by saying there's 20 homeless people, there's 20 empty houses, let's put them all in there. I think what we need to do is say there's these number of houses, there's these number of people, what do we then put in to support putting them into houses? So I think that's a much wider issue that we can build on, that follows on a bit from the questions that Winnie was asking. Could you repeat the second part of your question?
The second part is how will you implement support services to complement this?
Sorry, so I'd started to touch on that. So that is where I said about what support we need. So my friend Steve, who was homeless, street homeless for a very long time, he was unable to access sensible drug rehabilitation schemes, which meant that it then knocked on into his ability to apply for work, to sign on for to get universal credit and the housing benefits, which means he wasn't paying rent, and it would spiral into this situation where he would be put into properties and then leave. So I think that is what we need to be looking at, is the sort of the distinction between people who happen to be homeless and people who are homeless because there are wider issues that need support and need backup. And I think that if we are then putting those sorts of services in place to say, if you have got drug problems, what can we do? Where can we send you? Can you go to, can we get you in through a rehabilitation scheme? Can we give you job coaches? Can we get you support to just re-enter society? Because actually that, if you've been street homeless for a very, very long time, it's very, very difficult to then go into a house and a community and neighbours and paying gas bills and those sorts of just everyday mundane issues. And so sometimes just enabling and empowering people to understand and to be able to cope in those ways is something that's a really easy fix to help. So I think those are the wider issues, is looking at what are the specific problems and how can we encourage and empower people to have being placed into housing and being rehomed and being taken out of off the streets or out of a homelessness situation to actually retain their home and to move forward and to succeed. So those would be the sorts of things I would be looking at.
Thank you very much.
So we're going to pass it over to Isha, who's going to start off on the unhealthy lifestyles and food poverty.
Thank you, Fatma. So the question that we have for you is, holiday hunger has been very topical due to the pandemic. Food banks have a stigma for you, and reduce that stigma in the future.
Well, ideally, it'd be, we would like to not have people so reliant on food banks, I think is the really key issue, and looking at how we can work on that. That isn't the immediate early fix. So I think you raise a really good point about stigma and about what's going on. And I think a lot of it comes down to the fact that that's a very hard win, and that's a very big ask, because that there will always be an element of stigma attached to that. I think what we need to do is to help young people to understand that actually, no matter what the situation that's happened, that enables, that meant their family is in that situation, that it's to empower them to understand that this is not something that they've created or they're responsible for, and actually being able to access those schemes and access other support that comes with food bank use, such as free school meals or holiday club meals. Using those sorts of things isn't about shouldn't be being seen as being personal to them. And I think that comes a lot from education and empowerment and understanding. And that's something I'm very keen to see, is that we have a greater discussions within schools, within education settings, within organisations that actually says, this is just unfortunately where we are at the moment. And it's around sort of saying, and that's why Marcus Rashford is such an amazing advocate for around this area. And he would be someone very much I would be wanting to invite in and work with, because he is the epitome of being in that situation as a young person and as a child doesn't mean that you can't go on to achieve, your dreams and your ideals and where you want to be, and to fail to succeed. And food poverty is something where you would ordinarily think, if I'm in that situation and I'm really struggling, I'm not going to be a top level athlete. I'm not going to be playing for those clubs, because that's not something that's open for me. And I think that's why he's such a good advocate, because he's at the pinnacle, of where he's achieved. And I think using something like that and his openness and his honesty and being able to translate that into an education for young people to actually take away a lot of the stigma. And you know what I've really noticed in the meeting today, it's something that I do because it impacts on friends and colleagues. It's not to do with food poverty, but if you sit in a meeting with a whole load of people my age, they wouldn't have their pronouns. It's really acceptable for the youth. And I think that that's where we fight the stigma, is it's not about convincing my generation. It's not about convincing the boomers. It's not about doing those sorts of things. It's about speaking to young people and saying, this is not a problem that has been created by those who are accessing it. Let's just make this normal. If someone has brought in something that's, that makes it stand out, that they are getting free school meals or have gone to a food bank, so what? And that's where we need to get to with young people, and the ability and the willingness to change and to embrace that sort of change in the same way that we have with using pronouns is exactly what gives me the hope that actually that is where the change will bring. And that comes from education, and that comes from empowering support for each other in the same way.
Has that answered your question, Isha?
Yes, it has. Thank you.
Thank you.
So we're now going to move on to Jess.
Hi, I'm Jess. My question is that unhealthy lifestyles are largely due to cost. Young people don't have access to healthy food, transport, or club membership because of the cost, and the less healthy the lifestyle, the bigger the cost to the NHS. As Mayor, how would you increase accessibility to healthy lifestyles?
This touches on to one of my really big passions for Greater Manchester, which is around transport and how we access and get around our city region, but also how we get to leave it as well. And that's around empowering active travel, so walking and cycling. And there's so many impacts on that for a healthy lifestyle, not just because it's the person themselves who's walking or on a bike, who's exercising and getting those positive benefits, but that actual modal shift away from being reliant on cars and all the pollution that comes with that just puts us into a slightly healthier lifestyle to start off with. If we're not breathing in horrible amounts of pollution, we're a little bit closer to being healthy. So one of the great visions I've got for Greater Manchester is that we would have an ability to take our bikes and cycle up to the bus in the same way that you do across Europe, pop the bus on the back of the bike, you go in through the side door, get off at the other end where you want to go and cycle. Obviously you can do that with walking, but that opens up our green spaces really significantly, and particularly to young people who wouldn't be able to, who can't get to some of those places because they can't drive there, they can't put the bike on the back, that's too far to cycle, so they're not being able to go and do something like that. And that deals with the sort of second or third part of your question about the cost of those sorts of, being able to be active. I would imagine, I know my son who's 14 would love to be able to do that, get on the bus at the end of the road, go to an outdoor place with his cousin or his friends, and go and have a really good cycle rather than going up and down the canal near us. And I think that's a really important thing, but it also opens up outside of the city. So I've got friends who would love to go and do, there's apparently a beautiful cycle, you can get the train outside of Greater Manchester, and then you cycle back in, and it's lovely hillside views, countryside, the sort of thing that actually all should be accessible to all of our young people and all of our residents. They're a family of 5. You can only put 4 bikes on a train at one time. So they can't take all of them to go on that sort of day trip. And that to me is madness. We've got some of the most beautiful countryside in the country just on our doorsteps. If we can enable people to get out there easily, to go for walks, to go hiking, to go and climb the hills, to, get people at Kinder Scout and get people out into the Peak District, but they can get there on their own, that's going to be really important. So yeah, those two things sort of join up for me and fit in with that overall transport idea of being able to cycle up to the tram, get on, go off out to the hills and go off on your bike. Has that answered your question, Jess?
Yeah, thanks.
So we are now going to move on to access to work and training. And I believe it is who's covering for Leia of Adila?
Yeah, it's me. Hi, I'm Adila. I'm 17. My pronouns are she, her, and my year group is year 12. First, I want to say I think it's so cool that we have a female candidate. I'm really, really glad. My question is, as a young person, I find it challenging to find access to jobs and training for the future. Can you tell us how you're going to make sure young people have access to information about how to access jobs and training? And could you also tell us how you're going to put that in place and what your plan might be? Thanks.
Absolutely. Do you know, it's such an important thing that we are not just forgetting young people, and that's something I've seen an awful lot. That it was, school was sort of there were different options as we got to school leaving age for a long time, and then it was sort of children and young people seem to have just been forgotten about. And there's minimum wage applies, either doesn't apply or is very different. There's no access to things. Apprenticeships, while can be a good scheme, but on a lot of them they're so poorly paid that you are then forced to be at home to be able to access them. And I just think overall it has been forgotten. And very much a bit of a lost generation, which is interesting when we're hearing about how much there's now suddenly a focus on children's mental health in the pandemic. And I keep thinking, no one seems to have cared for the last 10 years. So where's this sudden concern come from? I think the issue is working to build that into part of schooling, and to make sure that schools become really good information hubs about where people go on to, because there's an awful lot of focus I found when I was at school, and I'm finding with my son, particularly, who is 14, so he's year 10. It's already a discussion around, you're streamed into this one, so you can choose your A levels, but your GCSEs, but you're streamed here, so you need to do the baccalaureate subjects, and you need to do the baccalaureate subjects so that we get the grades, and then you go on to here to do, to sixth form to do your A levels, and you're there because you're then going to go to university. And if you're very much streaming that way, it just feels very geared to that, and that's where everyone seems to be in a bit of a push. But that isn't ideal, and that isn't right for everyone. And I think there needs to be a sort of recognition that actually people need to be helped and supported to go on to different careers and to understand where they are, and to also understand that there's a whole new area of careers that didn't exist, and I sort of look at now, and I'm hopefully not too ancient compared to the when you all look at me, but I just have no idea what some people are talking about with what jobs they want to go on and do, and what is available as an option that just didn't exist when I was at school. And I think that that's where we're missing an opportunity, in the fact that we have stayed very rigid with education and with going on after education. And if you aren't going into a profession or a traditional role, I think children and young people are very abandoned and not helped. So I think that's it, is we need to, comes back to the same point that I sort of started with the homelessness. It's about engaging and finding out where is the information missing, and what do we need to do about that. And that to me seems to be around anything more vocational rather than academic, and those new and emerging roles that people my age just don't understand. I've got one of my best friends, her son is a shoutcaster. That probably means something to some of you. It means absolutely nothing to me. He's got a first-class degree in his subject, and that's what he's doing. And it's apparently some form of commentary on video games. And they've explained this to me, and I still go, that's a thing. But he's doing really, really well at it. He's getting paid, quite well for it. He's being flown around. Well, he isn't now, being flown around the world to commentate on some of these big games. And that is a fantastic career option, but it's something that I still don't understand. And I think that's what it is I think we need to really actually understand where the world is. And I don't think that I'm necessarily the best person to do it, but I think we need to really be working with that generation who have just not long gone before, sort of 17, 18-year-olds, who really know where the world is and where the problems are. It's not for me to fix. I'm too old to fix it. I've got to where I'm going, and I know where the sort of path is taking me. But see where there is. And also it comes back a bit to this sort of stigma that we talked about with food poverty. There's still, I feel like, quite a lot of stigma around if you're not going through that baccalaureate, A-level, university, profession. Well, that has all got to change. That's got to massively change. And we can't have a view that if you're not going into a profession that you're in some way inferior. That's nonsense. And we've seen that during the pandemic. We've really seen who the key workers are and how important, all areas of work are to us. And that's what we need to be looking at, to take away some of the stigma if you're not going to university, and to empower. I think I've possibly taught myself around in circles. So if you need to come back and pull that apart, shout.
I do have a point, and I don't know how much power you have in this, but wouldn't it just be easier to change the education system? Because if you think about it, school doesn't really teach you anything for real life work. Even when you think about university, when people ask you about like uni, they always say, oh, it's nothing like high school. So if it's nothing like high school, why are we learning it?
Yeah, you know, I agree with you. I would have almost no power to do anything about it. That would come with central government. But I absolutely do agree with you that education needs to be looked at. I don't believe that we should have children in school at 4. I think that there should be a later start. You may or may not know that Green Party policy is around scrapping Ofsted. We don't think that those sorts of checks that then put children through additional strain and pressure just to assess teachers is appropriate. We're also, as a party, very much of the view that the voting age should be lowered to 16. And we do really, you know, we are a party that is very much about empowering young people and hearing the voice of youth and recognising really the value that adds to society and particularly to our party. So no, I can't really change a lot of things, but absolutely I empathise and agree.
Okay, thank you.
Just moving on because I'm a bit conscious of time. We're just going to pass it over to Luan now.
Hi, my name is Luan. I'm 17. And I wanted to say I just started sixth form, and although majority of my class use the Hour Pass scheme, there are some people who can't use it because they've repeated the year, which means that they're not in the age bracket to be able to use it. COVID means that a lot more people will be repeating the year and have been repeating the year, and this puts them at a disadvantage and they have to limit their transport. How would you expand the Hour Pass scheme so that it's accessible to more people, to more young people?
To more young people? Well, again, I think that ties in with what I was talking about earlier about just making transport generally more accessible. And being able to take bikes and you know, in particular bikes, but you know, onto buses and onto trams, because that's something that's very key, and that's something that impacts where I am. My son originally started with one school, and there was actually no way to get there apart from it's a 10-minute drive. To get there by bus was taking something like an hour and 20 minutes.
I'm 18.
So not even the cost, but actually the practical implications of using public transport were prohibitive. And you know what it's like at the end of the school day to then have to face that coming back in reverse is just, you know, it was just horrific. So I think that those are it's two things to look at with that. One, we need to make sure that young people can get to education. There's no point saying we think that, you know, oh, we think all these children should be in school and we shouldn't be in lockdown. No, you know, that's an ongoing issue that we need to ensure that people do get there. So I think that that's entirely right. That's something I completely endorse. And if someone is put back, that should be an exception that is built into the scheme, because someone will then be, and it doesn't necessarily matter whether it's COVID, it will also potentially impact on very late summer babies that could be in a different year to where they might go. You know, that's something that could impact just across the board. So I think that needs to be looked at, and this scheme needs to encompass anyone who is in full-time education. But also we need to look at whether transport works for people travelling to school. And so predominantly to me that ties back in with the cycling. You know, if you've got quite a way to get to the bus stop, but once you get there, it's a 5-minute bus journey to get to school. It makes sense to be able to cycle there in a third of the time, pop your bike on the bus, and get off at the other end and have had a quicker journey. And that's something we need to look at as well. Is it's not just cost, it's time, it's just levels of exhaustion, it's it's all of those things in together. But no, absolutely no one should be disadvantaged financially from attending a place of education.
But we are sticking to 5 minutes per question. That answers your question, and I know it was mentioned in the pre-information, but I just want to
yes, thank you.
That we're going to move event is being recorded, and we do have a report called Rosa. I think Rosa, if you want to say hi.
Yeah, it's fine. Hi, me again.
Course, yeah. So I'm Rosa.
This topic is on domestic abuse. So the question is, due to COVID, there has been an increase in hate crimes towards minority communities, in particular the Asian community. This leaves the victims in these communities isolated and makes it harder for them to access help. What will you do to combat this and ensure that
Okay,
the people
I'm guessing we're
from
good
these
to go.
communities get the help that they
For the
deserve?
first question, I'd like to go.
I think that's a massively valid point. And one of the things that is very
Winnie, and
key
this
as an
question is
element
on
to
housing.
my campaign is the fact that it is fully inclusive. And that is, be it on the basis of race, gender identity, sex, anything, you know, whatever issue that you would ask if that is inclusive, that is very much where I'm at the heart of. And that is about, the key is to recognise where those issues fit within those different minority groups as well, and how to affect them. So it could be that if you've got a Muslim lady who is the subject, the victim of domestic abuse, not just, you know, societal abuse, but, you know, be it wider, that she has been attacked in the streets or verbally abused, or there's something at home, there is a slightly different issue around how that community can sometimes view that person. So again, it's about looking at how are we dealing with groups, and there isn't a one size fits all answer to this. And I think it's awareness of different cultures, awareness of different norms for people, awareness of different beliefs. And in the same way that across other parts of organisations, we would have an awareness of how to deal with those issues. So it's something like it's the organisation Tell Mama are very, very good at explaining not just about how to get help if you are a minority group who is subject to abuse, but it also is very informative to individuals, how to support if that's something that's going on, and how to be there to do that. And I think that's something, again, it comes back to education and information, to explain to people, if you see something going on, what do you do? And how do you interact, and how do you support? If you're aware of more domestic violence, how do you support in that instance? And I think that's, we as a society, and we've seen over the last year, are generally good, and we want to help, but sometimes we don't know how to, or we're afraid to. And I remember reading a really good infographic about, if you see someone who is being racially abused in public, as we saw a spate of horrible things on buses and trains before lockdown, you might not have the confidence to go and challenge the person who's doing that. But the advice was about, go and sit with the person who's there, engage them, talk to them one-to-one, have that eye contact, you know, empathise, support in a very quiet and unobtrusive and unthreatening way, but just sort of, you know, be there and be support. That's something we need to get out as a message to society as a whole, as to where do we go and what do we do, and how do we act in society-wide to do that. So it's not just about me as mayor saying I would do this or I would do that. I think what we need is campaigns around education and promotion of the best way for us all to do that, because I genuinely believe, and if I'm naive, so be it, that actually we are good and people do want to help, they just don't know how to. So that's where I would put the focus on, is to empower more people to just do those initial acts, and to take those first steps, and then we can look at where we again support, build and add to that on a more direct campaign and messaging process.
Okay.
Does that answer your question?
Yeah, I think so.
So we are now going to pass it over to Sana.
Hello, thank you. My name is Sana, and I'm 7 years old. My pronouns are she and her. My question is, can you tell me, what are you going to do, as you said that you're going to do so many investigations, to strengthen the investigation of emotional and psychological abuse?
Yeah, I think this ties in very much with issues that we've got across Greater Manchester with Greater Manchester Police, and how we have got a police force in special measures, and the impact that has. And one of the big problems that has come out of some of those reviews is actually that all levels of domestic violence have been not being dealt with appropriately and not been being supported. So actually for this one, there isn't necessarily the same level of consultation that I would do, because on this one, I'm absolutely clear where the problems are. And the starting point is Greater Manchester Police. And it's about going in and actually sorting out the policing decisions, because as mayor, I'd also be the police commissioner, and taking positive action. In my previous career, I was a senior lawyer with the Independent Police Complaints Commission. So I am very well versed in how the police work and how they operate and what we need to do to improve those systems. And excuse me, the dog's just done stop barking. How we can impact on those in a positive way and deal with some of the cultures within the police. So that would be the exact starting point, is we actually need to understand what the police are doing and why they are not doing what we should do, because it's all very well instigating new laws if we haven't got them being enforced properly. And obviously the coercive control is relatively new in legal terms. If we're not even getting the basic old form of domestic violence investigated properly, we're not going to get something new that involves training and education and understanding if we're not getting the basics right. Another part of what I would not be able to directly influence, but which I would be making very, very clear, is that we need to have a properly funded police within the country, and particularly, within my remit, within Greater Manchester, who faced so many cuts and so many reductions in officer numbers. They actually, where is the manpower to do what I would want them to do? But also to look at what influence and what bearing I could have on funding for keeping courts open. There's been, over the last 10 years, systematic underfunding of justice and removal, closing of courts, which means victims of crime are having to wait a year, 2 years, sometimes 3 years. I've got colleagues still in criminal defence, which is where I started my professional career, who are going to court now and having matters listed in 2023 already. And we're, to me, we're only just into 2021. That's someone who's had to go through a police investigation, through all the initial court hearings to get to there. That's not okay. It's not okay on any basis for that to be happening. But the impact it has on victims of domestic violence is very extreme, because it's sometimes taken a huge amount of courage and bravery to come forward and to say that that's the situation you're in, and to ask for the help you need. If you're then let down by the police, and you will then go on to be let down by the entire judicial system, it undermines any good that I could do in promoting those sorts of things. So that would be very much a key tenet, and going to Westminster and saying we need funding within this city region to help address the problems that 10 years of austerity have.
Because you have past the limit of 5 minutes.
Yes.
So we are going to have to move on to the next question. Sorry. And the next question, we're going over to Madison.
Hiya. We'll now be moving on to young people being heard in local decision making.
Hiya, I'm Hannah. I'm 19. I'm going to kick off this little section. So it's a really rare opportunity for us to be able to ask questions to people like yourself in the position of power that you're in. What action will you commit to taking to ensure that young people can communicate more often with people like yourself in positions of power that you are, and also possibly people higher than your power, and possibly more local MPs and of that nature?
Yeah, and I think with uniquely, as I mentioned before, within the Green Party, this is something that we all sort of really believe in. We do want to hear young voices. We want young people to be voting from 16 rather than from 18. We are very much into listening to young people. I think what I personally would want to do is not just to be able to set up, this would be an amazing sort of forum to keep going and to replicate and to expand upon, to be able to, to have me pulled in, on a periodic basis and face this sort of grilling from young people and actually have to justify what on earth I was doing and why. I think that would be outstanding. But I also think part of the issue I've seen with young people accessing and understanding politics is the fact that it's not taught adequately, and it's not enough of a part of the curriculum for people to understand it. And so I think that's really key. And it came up in another hustings that I was in recently, and someone was asking about town planning and planning permission and those sorts of issues that do impact on everyone. And I said, but how is anyone going to do that? Because no one understands those processes. If we're not teaching those things shouldn't be complex. They shouldn't be unattainable. They shouldn't be something that people can't understand. You and everyone on this call, if you see that something's going on in your area that you're not happy with, you should know how to go. And it's very dull, and planning committees within local authorities are tedious in the extreme. I understand that it's not joyful and a great way to spend time. But actually understanding what it is you have to do to be part of that process, be it sort of something else within local politics, I think is really, really key. And I think these sorts of meetings that we've had are just amazing, because I'm going to leave here with more taken away and more notes that I've made about the questions that you're asking and the issues that are important than you will probably all take away collectively from having spoken to me and the other candidates. But yeah, so that's what I'll do. It's about empowering, and it's about teaching and showing what politics and what local politics is about. It's about having access to those things. It's about inviting young people to come and see what I'm doing. It's about opening up those avenues of communication, but it's also about speaking to local councillors across the 10 districts and saying, right, this is what I'm prepared to do as the mayor. What are you going to do to match that? I'm going to meet with them once a month or once every 2 months. I'm going to have advocates from areas. I might have, a youth group that meets and sort of we talk about issues that are ongoing. That's what I'm going to do as mayor. How are you going to replicate that across the 10 boroughs? Because that's really key, and that fits in with Green Party policy around voting from 16. You can't vote at 16 if you don't know what you're voting for or in or why or anything else. So that is really part of how I interpret that part of our policy and where I see it going.
Do you mind if I follow up?
Yeah, go for it. We still have time.
Hi, I'm Ben. I use he, him pronouns. I'm 15 and I'm in year 10. Just a quick follow-up. How can you reassure us that you have the communications needed to take forward issues that are important to young people?
I think in some ways I can tell you that because I've got 2 of them sat in the house with me every day. My son and daughter, are probably far too political for their own good. My son is presently on one of his Minecraft servers elected president, and spends a lot of time asking me to read his manifestos that he's written. I think sometimes he puts me to shame when he writes some of these documents that he comes up with. And that's come and that's been fostered because of the environment that he's been in and he's been brought up in, and where he's been empowered by me to understand what's going on around him and how he can fit in and where he can, find a home. And, worryingly for me, he's already started talking about how he can become an MP and what he'd do if he was Prime Minister. And it took me till a lot older than 14 to get to there. So I say that somewhat glibly, but I don't mean it glibly. I mean that is something on a small level I have done. It's something I've done with my children were both home educated for quite a number of years. And that's something and discussions that I've had with other children and young people that I've come into contact with who've known that I've stood for local council as an MP, who've known for obviously we've had a delayed election for the Greater Manchester Mayor, that knew that was a role I'd been elected by my party to stand for, and will come and engage and say, what can we do and how can we do that? We've got as a party a very active Young Greens that come and they have directed policy and they have impacted on us because of the way the Green Party runs. Anyone who's an ordinary member can come in and change policy and impact that. And that's something that we've had an awful lot of from our Young Greens, and they are very much empowered. So not just personally with my experience and how I've brought that out, but as a party and how our ethos works, that's something that's a really key element to that. And I come back, I don't think these things are particularly complex at times. The really key thing is always listening. And it might sound like I'm sort of copping out with some of the answers to say it's about how we'd listen. Excuse me. That isn't a cop out. Excuse me. I think one of the most empowering things that you can do to any group of people is to listen to them and to hear them. And that's why I go back and start there so often, rather than just say I would do this because I know better. So that's why the sort of groups I've said with having this sort of meeting, let's do it. You know, if I'm in post on the 7th of May, I'm going to be emailing and saying, right, how do we set this up and how do we get this as a something going forward, and how do we expand it and make it a permanent part of my role, that I meet with groups of young people like yourselves. Have I gone on too long, Fatima?
Yeah, like we kind of need to move on to the next question. No, it's okay. So we are moving on to Jacob next.
Hi, I'm Jacob. Him pronouns, and I'm in year 10, I'm 15. So I'd like to ask you, would you put police in schools? And if so, how would you consult young people in schools about this?
My immediate reaction is absolutely not. I remember being truly horrified by the thought of putting the police in schools when that was first mooted. And my view hasn't changed. You know, I go back to what I was just saying in answer to the last question. If that was something that people were coming to me and saying, this population of Greater Manchester's young people and schoolgoers actually want that to happen, then that's something I'd have to listen to and hear why. But no, I don't believe that the police should be in school. And that's something that I would be quite resistant to. Was there a second part, Jacob? I'm sorry.
It's Izzy who will be
oh, right, okay.
Second part.
Hi, I'm Izzy. I'm in year 11. My pronouns are she, her. And just to follow up from that, I was going to ask, what's your plan to prevent this idea from coming up again? And how can you use other things to keep us safe in school, for example, education?
I think my view is my starting point with the idea of putting police in school was just such horror and shock that I think that I just wouldn't, you know, you'd have to work so hard to convince me that that would be a good idea. And that comes from a great number of years doing criminal defence and equally, you know, sort of large number working with the Independent Police Complaints Commission. I don't think that police should be in schools. I don't think that they are placed for police officers to be. And what I'd hate to see is a sort of slow creep into the American school situation where we are, you know, schools don't feel like education settings. They feel like sort of rodeos and danger zones for children and young people. That can't be where we progress to. On the issue of keeping safe, is there particular concerns that you have? I mean, are you thinking about attacks from externally to school or just generally being safe? Sorry to come back to you, Izzy.
Well, that's really interesting because I was thinking about this a couple of days ago, and my school did a form. We had to fill in, like, on a scale of 1 to 10, how good you think the school dealt with certain things. And one of the questions were, how safe do you feel in school? And it was the lowest scoring point. And the school's, like, counteraction to that was to build higher fences. And it was more the idea, I think, and what I've spoken to my friends about, is that we felt unsafe from the people in the school already. It's like we've had situations where the school's been on fire, we've had situations where the police have been called in. So to see the school like build higher fences, that kind of didn't really solve the problem that we were looking for. So I think when I say things like education, I'm thinking, how will you make sure that there's talks given to pupils about how to make school a safer environment for everyone to be together and be safe with each other.
Yeah, and I think, thank you. Sorry to go back and ask you to clarify. I think that that's a really important question, and I think it ties in with the sort of another hat on that I have. I have just completed a master's in counterterrorism. I'm just undertaking a PhD in counterterrorism. And one of the things that I am looking at, not saying that your schools are at risk of terrorist attacks, please don't, but one of the things that we've looked at as part of that is around sort of radicalisation and about how children are potentially radicalised and brought into violence and those sorts of wider issues. And it's something I know an organisation that you may have come across, Hope Not Hate, have been looking into about how teachers are trained on recognising those sorts of aspects. And that's part of where my PhD thesis is looking at, is what schemes like Prevent and training around those actually teach people like the police, but also teachers, doctors, nurses, and how to recognise issues and concerns. And I am of the view that I don't think that that's being done in an appropriate way. I think it's being overly simplified and it's not recognising the real risks. So I think that that is a bigger issue for me to bring on and bring that sort of counter-terrorism hat into play very much, to look at actually what is the danger within those sort of issues. So if it is children who and young people who've been radicalised in some way, and it doesn't have to be into a well-known terrorist organisation, it can just be into crime or into gangs or into antisocial behaviour, is looking at actually recognising that early, working, having a system that works not in a way like Prevent that can cause problems and upset and outcry, but that works to build relationships and to bring children back from that before we get to schools being set on fire or potentially weapons in classrooms. And it goes back to where I've said with a lot of these questions is it's about looking at the causes, not coming in heavy-handed to just take on the impact. So I think that's where it would come down to. It wouldn't be an immediate fix because those things take time to embed. And if there were genuine risks to schools, we'd have to look at how to manage those on a sort of case-by-case basis. But I think overall, that would be how I would look at it, is to approach it from fixing those issues and recognising them, empowering teachers and school staff better.
Thank you.
So we are now going to move over onto mental health with Lydia.
Hi Melanie, my name is Lydia. I am 16 and my pronouns are she and her. My question is, as young people, we have a lot of ideas on ways to include mental health in the school, college and uni curriculum. If you were successful in your position, would you be willing to help us implement mental health into the curriculum in education settings across Greater Manchester, and how would you ensure this was accessible to all?
A very short answer on that one is yes. It would have my complete support. And you've already touched on the fact that it is ideas that are coming from the young people themselves, and that ties in very much with how I would want to approach those sorts of issues. And again, it comes back to empowering across those sectors that you've mentioned. And it's something that is really important that we've seen so much over the last year, that schools are more than just places where children and young people go to be educated. They are real hubs of the community, and they have got a really important role, much more, I think, than a lot of us realised. And I think that is where we, all this sort of build back better and catch up for children and catch up for young people. And actually, I think that's slightly problematic in the language, because actually I don't think we need to do that. I think what we need to do is approach the entire way we come out of the pandemic and build forward into encompassing those sorts of issues, such as making sure mental health is prepared and covered. And one of the big things that I've noticed over the last 10 years is how much mental health support and provision for young people has been cut. and how much austerity has removed services that were really key to areas and to the young people in those areas to support them. And actually, rather than saying, well, we want all these, we want primary school children at school till 6 o'clock at night, working all through their summer holidays, and they must learn extra fronted adverbials, actually investing into those proper schemes and putting things back and empowering young people to understand that it's not about whether you know what a fronted adverbial is. I've managed okay without having the first clue, but actually it's about making sure that schools are properly safe, not just in the way that Izzy was just talking about, but also in a way that they are safe from a mental health point of view, where you aren't being pressured and where there is proper support in place if there are issues that arise. And that, I think, is really key. And it comes back to, again, educating, supporting teachers, supporting schools, and making sure that message is clear that we don't want Westminster telling us that we want to have extra time in lessons and learn extra maths. We need to actually support young people, and that will impact going forward in a much more positive way.
Thank you.
Hiya, my name's
Maddie. Go for it, Maddie.
My name's Madison. My pronouns are she and her, and I am 16 in year 12. A few years ago, statistics told us 1 in 10 young people had a diagnosable mental health condition. This is now 1 in 4, and that is just those diagnosed. Despite growing need, mental health support continues to be lacking, and this is the same for young people in Greater Manchester. For those in minority groups, this adds another layer of difficulty, and accessing support becomes an even harder challenge. As Mayor, will you ensure that mental health services are properly funded and accessible for all, and how do you plan to do this?
I think, Madison, this is a really, really key point, and I hope in answering Lydia, I've really showed how much I support these moves and agree with you. I think it's appalling that mental health provision has been cut. I'm more distressed by the day when I speak to friends who are trying to access CAMS services, because there isn't anything alternative other than that very high level intervention, and they're being told it's going to take 6, 7, 8 months to get some support. And for a young person in crisis who needs support now, they might not have that time. They need something to happen, and they need it to happen much sooner. And I think that every time that any mental health services and provision has been shut down, that has massively disadvantaged young people. And I worry whether that's had much more of a significant impact than just mental health concerns, whether it actually has had some fatal impacts on our young people. And that's something that I can't tolerate or accept. So it ties back in with where I was answering Lydia before, is that we need to make sure that there is services and provision within schools and signposting to those provisions. And you're entirely right, it needs to be funded. And that's very, very important. And to me, that is much more important as a COVID recovery scheme than additional lessons, as I've mentioned. The other thing that is really important, and it touches on talking the answer I gave to Izzy with regards to danger in schools, and talking about how we empower teachers. I think we need to really empower teachers to spot signs of mental health and mental distress in young people. And that's particularly within secondary schools and further education colleges, where you're not in the same environment that you are at primary school. You don't come in at 9 o'clock and sit with one teacher who can see whether you're getting more and more sad as the week goes on and can ask you what's going on. You might only pop in and see one teacher sort of for an hour or two over the week. But they all need to be looking out for our young people in the same way that primary school teachers are much better able to. And the only way we can do that is to have a provision of education and empowerment. And that would mean tapping into accessing things like the teachers' inset days, where they go and have training and they go and stay, when schools are shut, they will all get to be getting together, and they will do statutory requirement training such as safeguarding and GDPR training and those sorts of things. But there's also quite a lot that can be guided and that can be directed. And I think those are the conversations I'd want to be having with head teachers and school leaders, to say staff need to be really trained in those inset days and updated regularly on recognising issues relating to mental health, because I think when you've got schools working as part of that community, as I've mentioned previously, and you've then got support services in place to back that up that have been funded and have been funded through local authorities and through what, you know, where I can add as mayor, I think you've then got a sort of a much bigger safety net and web around young people, where people are picking things up and able to offer support, able to signpost. So that would be the key thing. And I think getting into staff inset days is actually really, it's an easy thing, because schools already have to have budget to cover training on those sorts of issues. It exists. It's very small after COVID and the extra cost, but it still is there as designated budget to school that we can access and ask, please do this. This is so very, very needed. So that would be the sort of immediate action.
Thank you very much.
Do I have time to add a little point on, or do we need to move on?
We do kind of need to move on, sorry.
Okay, that's fine.
So we're going to move on to the last section now, the environment. And I think you guys can all tell, like, we are a bit over scheduled, but like it'll only take like 10 more minutes. And we are moving on with Seb now, who's going to be asking a question on the environment.
Thank you. What have you done or do you plan to do if you are elected as mayor to halt the current climate crisis regarding emissions, especially greenhouse gases?
Hi, Seb. Thank you for that. I wonder if I put out to all of you, if you would know that at the moment across Greater Manchester, every pension for every teacher, for every council worker, for everyone that's employed by the council is presently invested in fossil fuels. Because that's something that I have gone and stood and protested about, and I have gone and supported elected colleagues to go in and to raise, sorry, excuse my dog, to go and raise action points to actually say we must, across Greater Manchester, divest from fossil fuels and take all monies from pensions out of those funds. And the reason why I've gone and stood on street corners and protested that is because it doesn't just matter to say we have passed a climate emergency agreement. What we have to do is we have to live that and breathe that. And in green politics, you're quite often here talking about the impact that a green in the room can have. And so that's where for example, in Trafford, where we've got 3 elected councillors, now every motion that goes through that council chamber, we've got 3 green voices saying, we've passed a climate emergency motion. How does this that you want to do, whatever this is, how does that fit in with that? How is that actually tackling the climate emergency? They have gone and raised points to say we want to have Greater Manchester pension funds divested out of fossil fuels. But there's only so many at the moment elected councillors across Greater Manchester, and we've only got so many greens in the room. And the sort of tagline of my campaign is we can put a green in every room. And that's what electing a green mayor brings, is we put me into every one of those meetings and those discussions and those conversations to say, where is the climate emergency in this provision? Why, when you're proposing that we do whatever it is that they're proposing, where does that fit into the declaration about the climate emergency? And I can be there holding them to account. And quite often, even one green on a council, even one green on Manchester Council, has had a huge impact on doing that. So actually, rather than just one thing that I can do, just by being elected and just by being present, having a green in the role of Greater Manchester Mayor would bring a huge, huge change to how we would address the climate emergency, because everything would suddenly become about the climate emergency.
Thank you for responding. I'll now move on to Dylan.
Thank you, Seb.
Hello, my name is Dylan. I am 15, so I'm in year 10, and my pronouns are he, him. And my question is that given that climate change is a class issue, as over 90% of our emissions are produced by the richest 1% of people. How are you going to address this issue?
Dylan, that's an amazing question. And so accurate and so spot on. And I think one of the really key things, and the simple things from what power I would have and how I could address things, would be to look at things like transport and about how we operate our city and how we operate just the very dull and tedious things like new buildings, about green belt and about those sorts of issues. So one of the conversations that's come up when I was talking about the green belt was around the fact that people want to build on our green spaces, but not social housing with any public transport links and options for people to be close to work and to commute, but 4-bedroom detached houses with really large drives to put your selection of Range Rovers on. That's something you're not going to see happening with the Green Mayor. That's not part of it. And one of the questions right at the start, I really apologise, I forgot who asked it of me, but about could we home people in empty houses? That's also part of it, is where can we put, what can we do with our empty spaces that we've got and our accessible brownfield sites to make sure we're building in a way that we aren't empowering people to just go and buy more cars, where we've got proper systems in place where people can access public transport and to get around when people are near work. And also looking at just things like, how is work going to change after the pandemic? So there's one site quite local to me where they want to build a huge office development on greenfield sites, and there is not one form of public transport going into that at all. It's all roads. And what we've seen over the pandemic and over lockdown is that actually it is sort of very much the privileged workers who are the ones who are able to work at home, because it isn't, nurses and bin men and people who stock our shelves. They can't do that from home. They're still having to travel. So it's looking at how do we address that and how do we impact on those people to sort of say, do you know what, do they have to come in? And if they do have to come in, can we make them travel in a better way? Another thing that I would be looking at is around the airport and about travel and about incentivising using greener forms of transport for long distance travel. So using rail, and trying to discourage the discounts that we're seeing this government put through on flights and aviation, so that encourages people to travel. So we've seen over the last few weeks that we've had a cut in aviation rates, we've had a cut in petrol or no increase in petrol prices, and yet massive increase in rail fares. That doesn't impact on the 1%. That impacts on the day-to-day people getting about their business, and that's all very much very wrong. So I think the real message is that green policies are very much at the heart of who I am. Obviously, that's relatively as an easy sell, I hope to convince you as a Green Party member. But I am a Green Party member because I recognise those issues and I recognise the problems that come with the actions of the 1%. And as mayor, I can't change an awful lot of that in the way that, I would love to see society change. That's just the limitations of the role. But within Greater Manchester, what I can do is put those sorts of that awareness and to build on the awareness that our young people have, to really promote that, to say this isn't okay and these are how we're going to change, just simple, small things at a time. But each one of those makes a big difference. And transport and getting around our city and how it operates and how accessible it is without having to rely on your Range Rover is going to be a really key part of that, and something I really want to see change quite quickly if I was elected.
Thank you for that answer. I just got a quick follow-up on that one. My name's Gulliver, I use he, him pronouns, and I'm in year 11. Would you stick to the current Greater Manchester target for carbon net neutrality of 2038? And if so, how would you reach this measurably?
That's another excellent question. I think it needs to be reviewed fully. So I think the first thing would be to sit down and see how they've come up with that number. I would be very much pushing for that to be a lot quicker. you know, I've sort of glibly said on a number of occasions when I've been speaking to the press, there is no planet B. And that drives me. And that is the heart of everything I do and say. And that is a really key thing. We need to act now, and we need to be doing everything we can now before we just, you know, destroy the entire planet. So actually every small step that I can take, and everything that we can encourage, and every step that we can do, you know, to just really try and lead the way, I think, as well as have an impact, but to really demonstrate what can be done by a city region. And that can be accessible travel and making people be able to leave the cars at home, not just put a congestion charge in, because that doesn't impact, as you know, as Dylan rightly pointed out. How does putting a congestion charge in place actually impact on the 1% who are the generators of carbon emissions? Let's try and go for real fundamental modal shift when it comes to transport and moving around our city. Let's free up and, you know, stop even considering building on green belts. Let's look at how we can reuse land and reuse empty properties and reuse and regenerate. And I talk quite often about make, do and mend. And it's a very old-fashioned slogan that was around in the war when resources were short and resources were tight. And I use it quite deliberately because resources are short and time is very, very tight. And so it is looking at what can we do across the city region. And even if it is seemingly small steps, let's do those. But also very much, as I've mentioned before, we need to stop having everyone who works and is employed by the city, by the local authorities, need to stop having their their pensions invested in fossil fuels. That's just, to me, is absolutely unforgivable and something that needs to be addressed immediately, particularly when even on a practical level, they are losing money from the pension funds by investing in fossil fuels. So there isn't even an argument that can be made to counter my position to say, oh, but we're making loads of money and everyone's going to have a better pension. That isn't even true. So yes, I think it's really important to address that, but that's at the heart of being a green, is to make sure that that is addressed.
Does that answer your question, Gulliver?
I just wonder if you have an exact date that you'd like to aim for if you're not sticking to 2038, just quickly.
The nearer the better. I mean, I would like us to aim for 2030, and I will be practical around that if needs be. But I think it's time to go big or go home, and we need to have a really close date, and that would be where I'd be pushing for very much from the outset. Sorry, I didn't give you a date.
Well, thank you so much for all your contributions tonight, Melanie. That has been a brilliant session. As we've seen tonight, and as young people time and time again prove, young people are not only the future of Greater Manchester, but the places, our city and our community, we're here and we're also the leaders of tomorrow. So before we let you go, we've got two final questions for you.
Okay.
The first question will be, can you sum up everything you feel is most valuable for young people to take away from this session? What's in it for a young person like us to support you as a mayor?
I think the real question is it's not just me being able to emptily say that I believe in young people, because I think every candidate that sits here will tell you the same thing. I think what I can tell you is that my party policy supports that position. We are, I think, the party who completely listens to and completely values young people. We want to hear their voice in politics, and we absolutely endorse that. And we are the only party loudly saying we want to include young people from 16 within those eligible to vote. And we are vocal about that. It's something I very passionately believe in. And so I genuinely, from a party position, without just me giving an empty platitude, can say that is who we are as a party, and that is who I am.
Thank you very much. And the second question, so being involved in politics as a young person, it shouldn't be a privilege, it should be a right for all young people, especially across Greater Manchester. If you're elected, will you personally commit to coming back to speak to us after 2 months of the election?
I think I've already told you that would be one of the first things I'd want to do. The person who organised this, I told them right from the outset that this was the hustings I was most excited about. It's the one I'm believing in absolutely, and it would be my absolute privilege not just to come back to a question and answer session, but to really set up a sort of council of young people where we meet quite regularly across the whole of my term and discuss the impact of policy with young people, and actually let you help me to formulate that. And I was given a really good piece of advice a few years ago, which is always have a mentor, and your mentor should be younger than you. And that's what I strive to do, and that's something that I have got within my professional life, but also within my personal life, and that's something I would bring into being the mayor. But I'd hoping there'd be more than one of you. I'd hoping that there'd be a number of you that we could meet and get together, and you can keep me on track and keep me honest to what the young people need.
Thank you. So the next steps after this hustings, we will then be compiling a result of everything you've said and reporting it back to the wider groups of young people before the elections. As you know, Rosa has been taking notes. We just want to wish every candidate good luck, and we hope that going forward, young people will be involved every step of the way. Thank you so much for all your helpful contributions, and we will be ending the meeting there. Thank you very much.
Lovely. Thank you very much for having me, and thank you. Excellent questions. You've really kept me on my toes, so I appreciate that. Thank you. Take care.
Thank you.
Bye. Thank you.